Hello and welcome to our 088 online training. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Edward Smith, Product Specialist for 088. Today's live stream, we're live streaming to YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. So if you're watching on those platforms, it's very good to have you with us. And if you're watching on catch up, if you're watching not live on those platforms as well, then thank you for joining us too. So we're taking a look at chases and effects today. Kind of pretty much a 50-50 split really. First half of the session we're going to be looking at chases, and then the second half we will be looking at effects. I've got about an hour and a half scheduled for this one. So we're going to be going in, we're going to be looking at actually programming both chases and effects, and then also we'll take a look at some of the tools that we've got available to us when it comes to actually playing those back live as well. Any questions at all, please do put them in the comments of whatever platform you're using. Those will filter their way to me and I'll be able to actually answer those for you live as we go through. Okay, great stuff. So let's dig in. So for this, I am sharing my screen. I've got capture visualization software running on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side of my screen, I have got Phantom Zeros running. So Phantom Zeros, that's free software that you can download from our website, 088.com. And in this case here, I'm using Phantom Zeros. It is emulating our Flex console, so you can see a on-screen representation of a Flex front panel. It is worth mentioning though, pretty much everything we do today, as long as your Zeros console is up to date on its software, the point of running this stream, the latest software is 7.9.7. So as long as you're up to date, you will be able to follow along. You don't have to be on a Flex. You can be on a FLX S console or another console running Zeros. Great stuff. So let's take a look first then at chases and chases to start things off. We'll look at the process of just programming a chase, and we'll actually start with just a really simple intensity chase. So for the first part of this session, we're just going to be dealing with really simple intensity chase. Even if you've just got some standard par patterns, you'll be able to run chases across those. So I'm going to go in, and I'm just going to take this playback fader down here, and that's going to stop that effect from running. And then we're going to dive in. I'm going to start to do a little bit of programming. So for this, I'm initially just going to work off of my channel faders. I'm not going to even go into any syntax or anything like that. I'm just going to keep things really simple and work off of my channel faders here. So I'm going to go and push my first fixture up. So I've just got my single fixture on stage there, and I can see that it's level in my output window there. And this is going to be the first step of my chase. So by chase, we mean several lighting states all following on and then potentially looping, depending on settings that we'll look at later. But several lighting states all following on from one another and starting to chase, hence the term, and so we can have lights flashing on and off. So there we are. That's what I've got on stage. I'm happy with that. That is going to be the first step, the first cue, if you like, of my chase. So I'm going to go in and tap record on my console, and I'm then going to go and tap my playback button here. I'm going to actually go and store this one onto playback number 2. There's something already on playback number 1. So there we are. That's stored in. Simple as that. So I'm going to go and repeat that process, and this time I'm going to have light 1 off, light number 2 on. And I'm going to go ahead and record that to the same playback. So I'm going to tap record, and I'm going to tap playback 2, in my case, playback 2's button again. And if I do that, I get a pop-up. Okay, and the console's saying, well, there's something already on this playback fader. What would you like to do? So first things first, I've got overwrite and merge. So I could, first of all, overwrite my lighting state. So replace light 1 with light 2 in this case. Another option there, I've got the option to merge as well. So I can merge the two. The next option along, we then have create Q2. So that's where, if you wanted to start to build a Q stack, and we've spoken about Q stack in our programming queues session, But if you want to build a cue stack directly onto one of your playback faders on the left-hand side of the console there, that's where you can go in and choose Create Q2, and you'll start to build your lighting states up. Of course, what we're interested in today, though, is this option here. We're going to go and choose Create Chase. So there we are. Click that, and there we are. We're stored in. So I'm going to go in and create another step to that chase. So I'm going to take my playback, my channel fader down, put the next channel fader up, tap record, tap that same playbacks button, stored in, and you might be thinking, okay, well, I want to keep a bit of a check on how many steps I've programmed of my chase. So what we can do is we can go and view the cues that we've gone and programmed onto our chase. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go to my playbacks fader function. So I'm going to toggle my faders from channels, so individual intensities, to my playbacks. And I can now see that playback 2 is indeed lit, meaning there's something programmed on there. So I'm now going to go and press and hold view and tap that playbacks button. If I press and hold view and tap that playbacks button, that's going to open that playback in my cue list window. Okay, so on my external monitor here, I can go to cues and I can see that cue list window there. If you don't have a external monitor connected, just tap that would have been automatically brought into your internal touchscreen when you press and hold view and tapped the playbacks button. And so if you're used to looking at cue stacks, this is going to be a very familiar window. You'll see that I can just see my individual lighting states listed as rows in here. And I've got a bit of information about those as well. But I have got that little handy indicator, just a subtle bit of information there. Chase in brackets. It's just letting you know that this is a chase, not a cue stack. Let's go in and program a few more. So I'm going to go to channels again. And I'm going to go and push up fader 4 now. I'm going to go and tap record and store that in. That goes as my next lighting state. And I'm just going to repeat that now. Just going to go in and repeat that a few times. Just so we can start to build up a little bit of a chase. Great stuff. That'll do. I've got eight steps to my chase there, 8 lights in use. So let's play that back then. We've done our programming, we've got our chase all programmed in. Let's play that back. Okay, so there's kind of what should we say? We kind of got 4 steps, if you like, 4 very small, subtle steps that we need to do to allow us to play back this chase. And if you're used to using the console, it will just be second nature. You'll just dive in and you'll be able to do it. But let's go through those steps. So first things first, again, this step is actually not necessary, but it's a good bit of housekeeping. When you're done with your channel faders, bring them down. Bring all your channel faders down when you're done them. It just keeps your workspace quite nice and neat. Then what we're going to need to do is toggle our playback fader or a fader function button there over to our playbacks. So again, I can now see my button is lit. And then very important step that we need to do, and again we've covered this in other sessions, at the moment we've got a load of red zeros, okay, because we'd gone in and used the channel faders to control those lights. Okay, and those red zeros have the highest priority. So if I were to go back and try and run my chase right now, nothing is going to happen, because as far as the console is concerned, we've told those lights to go to 0. So what I need to do is I just need to go and give a tap on my clear button on the console, and tapping clear, that's going to go ahead and clear out the red zeros, hence the name. So let's clear those out, and when we've done that, the last thing to do is I can just simply dive in there and raise my playback fader, and my chase starts to run. So I can start to just chase through these steps of my chase. It's just going to automatically start to run as I raise that fader. And as we said, when we get to the end of those cues, we loop back to the beginning. Now, what are we seeing in our cue list window? Well, first things first, we're seeing an up and a down time of 3 seconds. So that refers to our fade time, which if you're used to programming cue stacks, you'll be familiar with. And so you might be thinking, well, those fixtures are not fading. They've got fade times, but they are not fading. And you're right. Now, the reason we've got these fade times here, they are there for if we were to revert this chase back to a queue stack. So when we've got a chase programmed in, if we wish, we can actually just revert it back to be a normal queue stack. And we can then just run through it using a go button. So those fades are there just in case you were to revert. You've then got all of your normal fades there for you. Let's dive into the settings of our chase. Let's dive into the settings of our chase, and we're then going to be able to take a look at some of the options we've got available to us. A couple of ways of doing that. To go into the settings of a playback, either press and hold setup and tap that playbacks button, or I'm actually going to go to my faders window here, which gives me on-screen representation of my faders, and I'm then going to go and actually click on my playback, my playback fader in this window, and that's just a shortcut to take me into the playback settings. Now that we're in here, we go straight into the chase area of the playback settings. We've got these various kind of tabs of control in here, various tabs, various areas of control. Worth noting while we're here, under advanced, you can actually jump in there and give it a name. So I'm just going to go and name that my chase. But let's dive in and take a look at some of the options we've got within chase. So the first one of those options is revert from chase. So go and click that. It's going to hide all of my options there, and if I were to click OK, it turns it back to a normal queue stack. As I said, that's where we could then go back and use our normal queue fade times. Equally, if you've got a queue stack, if you go to the chase area of settings, you will see this. So you have the option to turn any stack of normal queues into a chase. Okay, so you don't have to say create chase at the point of recording those queues. You can actually go and turn it into a chase afterwards. Okay, and when you've done that, we've got these options in here. So let's dive in and take a look at some of those. First of which is the direction. Okay, or you can also see this, the order. What order are those queues of my chase going to run in? So forwards in order, or I can do backwards. They can run back up the queue stack if I want to. Random, another nice one in there. Tap random. The console's just going to randomly choose a new queue to go to each time. So it's going to go, let's go to this queue, let's go to this queue. It's just going to be a continuously random order of queues. Okay, worth mentioning, I've obviously chosen random, but you can see my fixtures are still in order. Changes you make in here won't take effect until you click OK. Okay, it's kind of quite nice. It means you can go and choose all of the different options you need and then click OK, and they all get applied at once. Another really nice option in there, and this will be something you'll be quite familiar with probably if you know, a lot of shows will use this kind of effect. And if you set a chase to be a bounce and click OK, and I'm actually going to go to my queues window to show this, you'll go right the way down and then you'll go back up, and you are just bouncing from top to bottom of your list of steps there. In my case here, what I'm actually getting on stage is I'm kind of getting a bounce from stage left to stage right. Okay, so it's quite a nice effect. Equally, you might have effect with, for example, par cans running down the pipe ends of your stage, going from upstage to downstage, and then bouncing. Things like that. Lots of options that you can use that kind of direction for. I'm just going to dive back into the settings. I'm going to go and set it back to forwards for us. And the next option we've got is intensity behaviour. Okay, so we've got some intensity behaviour options in there. Crossfade, ramp up, ramp down. 3 intensity behaviours. So again, at the moment, we can see that our intensity is set to crossfade. But you're probably thinking that is not crossfading. That is snapping. Okay, and that's because we actually need to take a look at the row of options below that. We need to take a look at the fade percentages, because we're saying, yes, have a crossfade intensity, but with a 0% fade percentage. So when we've chosen the intensity behaviour we'd like, we can then go and set a fade percentage. Worth noting, when you're in this window, you can use the encoder wheel to go and dial that fade percentage up if you wish. So I'm just going to go in and set a fade percentage of 100 and click OK. And so we've now got a crossfade from each step. Okay, and because we said it is 100% fade, that means 100% of the duration of each step there is going to be a fade. And we can actually see that happening in our output window here. We can see there is no point where our values are static. They're constantly changing and fading from step to step. But it means I do have the control, I do have the flexibility. I could go and say in there, actually do a 50% fade percentage. And that would mean half the duration it's in its programmed state, half the duration it is fading. And so we get this really nice kind of more steppy effect, but still with a little bit of a bit of smoothing between those steps. So you can go into quite a lot of control with this fade percentage. Nice thing about it as well, you can go in depth, and if you were to program a color chase, which you can do, you could have maybe a beam chase of different zooms going in and out and things like that, or you might have certain positions around your stage that you want the movement to chase between. All of that can be included in a chase as well. And when you do that, you then have option to actually go in and set a separate fade percentage per attribute. So a lot of control there. A couple of the other options here, ramp up and ramp down. I'll just very quickly show you. If we got ramp up there, those lights are going to fade into the step and snap off. Okay, and equally, you guessed it, ramp down, they're going to snap on and then fade off. So lots of different intensity options there, which are going to give you really quite interesting looks when used in conjunction with different orders and different fixtures across your rig. I'm going to go and set that back to a 0% fade percentage so that we're going to be getting a snap in there. Okay. I've noticed I've got a question coming to me. Thanks very much for the question from someone on YouTube. I'm just going to go finish covering the different options in here first, and then I'll dive into that. So what else have we got in here? Another option on the right-hand side is shots. We've got a term there, shots, 0 equals infinity. Shots is actually quite an old 088 term. It's been used in a lot of consoles. And shots is just the term we use for the number of times a chase runs through. So you might, for example, have a 2-shot chase. So if I went in there and I did indeed say that this is going to be a 2-shot chase, click OK. I'm going to then raise my chase's fader. And we're going to see that it's going to run through my chase once, going to run through it twice, and then it will stop. It will then halt. Okay, and that's what we would just refer to as a 2-shot chase. You don't have to have it running an infinite number of times and then turn it off manually if you don't want to. I'm going to go again, set that back to 0 or infinite. Above that, if you're on the full-size Flex or a console that has a audio input, you can use sound to light. Okay, so on the back of a Flex console, you have a 1/4-inch jack audio input on the back, and so you can send an audio signal into that, and the console will then hook any chases set to use sound to light onto that audio beat. It's a good idea, kind of a couple of tips with that if you want to use sound to light, just so you can get the most out of it. Biggest one is it's a good idea to have volume control over that audio input. So, for example, if you're getting a feed from a sound desk, if you're using a monitor feed from a sound desk, for example, that's really ideal because you can then kind of attenuate. You can set the volume that you want from the sound desk, and then you've set your sensitivity, and you can then kind of get that extra control to decide the sensitivity that the console will respond to. Going a step further from that, if you want to use it to the best of your ability, send the console only a filtered signal. So by that, if you want your steps of your chase to flash on the beat of the kick drum, for example, send it just the kick drum signal. So again, if you've got you've got a sound console next to you, the audio guy, ask him to send you a monitor feed just with the kick drum. And then again, you're telling the console exactly what you care about when it comes to sound to light. So a couple of tips there. If you're on FLX S though, for example, you won't see that because there is no audio input on the back. Above that, of course, we then have the chase speed, and the chase speed is in BPM, beats per minute. So if you know a song needs to run at 120 beats per minute, go into here and go and set 120 beats per minute and click OK. And your chase is then going to run at that speed. Now, of course, as well as having a fader with a playback, we also have a button with that playback as well. And the button of a chase, by default, is a tap tempo. So as soon as you've programmed a chase, I'm just going to go in here and give a few clicks, and I can set a speed using that tap tempo button. Now, if I dive back into my settings, I've now got 107.14 BPM. It's whatever the console has calculated from you going and tapping in on that tap tempo. Okay, and of course in this case it's then got rid of, it's replaced my static 120 beats per minute. So that's kind of another tip. If you want to have a static BPM, you never want that BPM to be changed for a chase, go and pop it in here of the speed you want, jump to general, and you can then choose the button function. So again, notice in here the default button function is indeed tap tempo, and if you don't want to accidentally change the speed of your chase, go and change it to another option. You could go and say flash, for example, and click OK, and that way I can actually use that button to flash and boost that lighting state level using my button there manually. Okay, and doing that means that I then won't overwrite, I won't replace my static defined BPM that I've given the console. Okay, but a lot of instances actually all you care about is the option to have a tap tempo there, so you won't need to worry about that. So I'm just going to dive in, pop it back to the defaults, and take a look at this last option we've got in here. So last option we haven't spoken about in the playback settings is the option to use global BPM. So I'm going to go and click on use global BPM, and my option there will go to having a red stripe in the button. It goes having a red stripe meaning enabled, and that kind of static, that kind of local BPM, if you like, disappears. Okay, we're now said we're using global BPM. And if I click OK, my chase is now going to be running at the global BPM default. Okay, to access global BPM, we can go to our Z window on the internal touchscreen. So for this, I'm just going to go and open the internal touchscreen window to be a little bit bigger for us. And I'm going to go and tap my Z key. And in there we can see on the third encoder wheel, we have our global BPM control. So on that wheel, I can go and actually, let me move that one a bit, there we are. Let me go and move that wheel so I can start to spin that up and start to boost that speed up. And as you can see, my lights are responding accordingly. If I go and speed that BPM up, my lights are starting to speed up. Or I can go and spin that wheel the other way, and I can actually go and slow that chase down as well, all using my wheel. In the middle of that wheel is a button, and I can go and give a few taps onto that button, and that is also my global tap tempo. So again, on that encoder wheel, you can see that the console has auto-calculated 112.14 from me going in and tapping in on that encoder button. So that's a really useful tool to be aware of. It means you can have several chases all running and all hooked and using the global BPM control. Okay, so it's a really powerful tool to be aware of. Taking that a step further, rather than having to go into the Z window and use an encoder wheel, you could configure a fader to control the global BPM. So let's take a look at how we can do that. To do that, we need to go into the settings of an empty playback fader. Okay, so again, if you want to use the buttons on the console, you can press and hold setup and tap an empty playbacks button for that. Or in my case here, I'm actually going to go and click in on an empty playback fader in my faders window. So I'm going to go and click on playback 3, and this will take me to some extra functions within the playback settings, kind of special extra fader function options. The last of which in here, worth mentioning, is Grandmaster. So if you're using a FLX S console, you do not have a dedicated Grandmaster fader, but you can configure any empty playback fader to be one from here if you wish. Of course, what we're interested in today, though, is our global tap tempo. So I'm going to go and click that, and then I'm going to click OK to confirm. And in my faders window now, I can see the global BPM speed displayed there. And I can go in and use my fader to actually go in and speed that up. And my chase will, of course, respond accordingly. Or I can go and slow that one right down using my fader. Again, same logic we've seen already. The button underneath that fader can be used as a global tap tempo. Okay. So I can now have all of my chases being controlled, the speed controlled from a fader. Now, if you always want to be using the global tap tempo button, the buttons under the faders are more clicky buttons. So if you want to use that regularly, you might want to use a softer button. Okay, and on the full size Flex, you have these keys here. These are user definable keys, which are cherry key style buttons, much softer buttons. And so you can, if you wish, go and configure one of those to be a tap tempo button as well. So to do that, hold setup and tap an empty user definable key. That one had something on it. I'm going to go and tap an empty one on UDK2. And I can go and choose, as you can see, global tap tempo there from those options. So I can now actually go in and use my nice soft cherry key to go and set that BPM speed as well. Great stuff. So that is using, that is chases, the settings we've got available to us, and also using that really useful function of global tap tempo. If you want to get rid of the global tap tempo fader and the global tap tempo UDK, if you're working on Flex, you can just get rid of them like a normal playback. Tap delete, go and tap what you want to get rid of, and you can then confirm that. Okay. The question from YouTube. Sorry for the delay response. Let me just have a look at that one a moment. That was just a question on merging. Let me just have a quick look. Let me just show you that one then. Let's say that I've got fixture 1 is on like that. I'm going to record that onto playback number 3, and then we'll have playback 2, and I'm going to record that onto that one there. If I were to do overwrite, click overwrite, I'm going to double tap clear now, go to my playbacks, it's overwritten it, so we now have light 2 on instead of light 1. Okay, so that's our overwrite, just showing you that one. Let me repeat that again very quickly for you. Let's have light number 1 on. Record that. Then let's have light number 2 on. And record that one. This time let's do a merge. And I'm then going to go ahead and push that playback fader up. And this time it's going to add it in as well. Okay, so when you merge, it's worth mentioning, you're going to be merging with the current lighting state. Okay, so if you wanted to, so in my case here, I've merged it with whatever I had on stage. So the light was on its own. It's going to come on its own. If I wanted to right now add light 1 in, so I'm going to do that, and I were to go and tap record and tap its button, and this time say a merge, it's now on from my fader. Okay, so subtle difference there. If I just record it, it's going to merge it with whatever lighting state we've got on stage right now. If I go and push that playback fader up, add a new light in and do a record merge, it's then going to add that new light in. So I hope that makes sense to the question that we had from YouTube. If you want more detail on that, do pop another comment in the chat. Great stuff. So let's take a look now. We've looked at programmer chase. We've looked at chase settings. a question we sometimes get asked, or something you might come across in a real world situation here, is let's say that you're going through your chase and you decide, in step 4, I need that light at 50%. Step 4, I need that light at 50%. And you might be quite familiar with the idea that if you want to update a queue, you need to go into that queue, is your easiest way of doing that. So if I try and go into queue 4 now, so I'm going to tap queue 4, well, it just keeps looping. It's a chase, so I can't just go into a individual queue by default. So if you want to go into an individual queue of a chase and kind of hold there, what you can do is hold Shift and tap your playbacks button. And if you do a Shift and tap the chases button, that will be by default a go snap. Okay, and so I've got my Shift key on my laptop in this case held down right now, and I can just tap my playbacks button and I can step through those queues individually if I wish to. So I'm going to go into queue 4. I'm then going to actually use a little bit of syntax and say 4 at 50 enter, and I'm then going to go and tap update, and then I'm going to go and tap my chases button. And I'm then going to go and give my chase a double tap again to get that resumed running at the new tap tempo. And that's now going to start to run through, and you can see that light 4 is now using the lower level. Okay, so that's a useful tip to be aware of as well. That's how you can go into an individual step of a chase, and then you might want to update it if you wish to. So last thing we'll take a look at before we go on and look at effects is we've seen here that our playback fader could be a chase if we want it to be. We've also mentioned about the fact that a playback fader could be a queue stack. And then the third option that a playback fader could be as well is an individual lighting state, like I've got here, for example. So a playback, a lighting state on a playback can kind of have one of these 3 behaviours. But something that's really common that you might want to do is you might want to have a chase within a queue. So by that we mean we want to go into a queue of our show and a chase run over the top. Okay. So how do we do that? Okay, well, first things first, let's just program a really simple queue stack together so that we can see this in action. I'm going to press and hold View and tap my Master Playbacks button to go back to viewing my master playback, and I'm then going to just go and program a few really simple lighting states. So I'm just going to work through the side light here and record those in. So I'm going to record that in as Q1. Then I'm going to have the next pair of lights there, and I'm going to record that as the next cue. I'm just going to repeat this a few times just to build up a few lighting states that we can then use. Let's take those guys off, and the next light's on. Just using a little bit of syntax to control these fixtures. You'll notice I'm using @ and @ as very quick shortcuts to turn those fixtures on and turn those fixtures off easily. I'm just going to do one last one and record that in. And I'm going to double tap clear. So I've now got 5 cues in my master playback. And if I push that fader up, I can then tap my go button to just go through those cues. You'll be very used to this if you're used to programming queue stacks on the console. But let's say, okay, well, when I want to go into Q2, yes, I want this lighting state on stage, but I also want my chase to run over the top. So right now, of course, if I wanted to, I could go in and push my chases fader up, and my chase is then going to run over the top as well. So I can start to manually mix playback faders. That's absolutely fine. Okay. But if you wish, you can make your life a little bit easier. Because if we want to, we can get the console to automatically run that chase over the top. To do that, we can go into the settings of Q2. Okay, we can go into the settings of Q2. So I'm going to go and click my little settings button here, and that will take me to the settings of Q2. These settings are available for every single queue that you program on the console. And in here, I'm actually going to go and choose macros. Okay, macros, some people find that a bit of a scary term. All it means is the console is doing something for you. It means that we can go and configure something so the console can help us out automatically. So I'm going to go and click macros. And I've got these 3 macro options when it comes to our triggering things from our queue. So we're saying, well, when we go into this queue, we can also have some of these things happening as well. First of which is a macro. So I could have a macro triggered from queue number 2 here in this case. So by macro, on all Flex consoles, Flex and Flex S, you have fixture macros. So you might want to say, okay, well, when I go into Q1, I want my fixtures to be lamped on. So you could actually go and configure that here if you wished. If you've got discharge movers, you could get them to be automatically lamped on in Q1. On the full-size Flex and consoles that can program macros, you can start to go and program macros that are really quickly recall strings of command lines and things like that, and have them triggered from queues as well, which can be really powerful, really useful thing to be able to do. But what we're interested in are these couple of options here. We can trigger a queue stack from this queue, or we can release a queue stack from this queue as well. And of course, what we want to do is in Q2, we want this chase to start. So I'm actually going to go and click Add. And when I do that, any programmed playbacks on your console are going to be flashing at you. And in here, you'll also get on-screen representations of all of your programmed playbacks. Any chases are going to be highlighted, just as kind of a handy identifier to show you which of these are chases. Because more often than not, you're probably going to be wanting to trigger a chase. You might want to trigger a queue stack in some cases, that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to go and click on my chase there. Okay, queue stack number 2 in this case. If I was to go and click on queue stack 2 here, that's how I can remove that trigger if I want to. Okay, so I've got the option to remove that from there if I wish. I'm going to click No. And it is worth mentioning, I could add multiple. I could have multiple chases and multiple different lighting states all being triggered from this one queue. Okay. But for now, there we are. Great. Queue stack 2 is going to be triggered in Q2. So I'm going to click OK on my macros window. And I can then go ahead and click OK on my settings window. And trigger 2 is then written into my queue settings column. So let's see that in action. So I'm going to go into Q1. That's our Q1 there. And I'm now going to go into Q2. And as well as Q2 fading in, my chase is fading in as well. Okay, and my chase was triggered, it faded in using that queue's uptime. Okay, faded in using that queue's uptime. So as well as these guys fading in for that queue, my chase has also faded in using that uptime as well, when it's automatically triggered. If I go into Q3 right now, my lighting state fades into Q3, but my chase, of course, continues running. We haven't told the console to stop our chase from running. If I want to, I could dive in and manually turn that off. So I could go and find my chase's fader, push that chase's fader up to full, and the fader then gains control. And I can then manually go and lower that fader if I wish to. Or again, I can automate that process a little bit. So this time I'm going to go into the settings of Q3, go to macros, and this time release queue stacks. And I'm going to go and tell the console that I want my chase to be released in this case here. Click OK on the macros window, click OK on the settings window, and I can now see that I'm going to be releasing playback 2 here. So let's go into our Q2. My chase gets triggered, and I'm then going to go into Q3, and my chase gets released. And the chase gets released over the fade down time of my release queue. Okay, it uses the fade down time of that queue. Now, something that's worth mentioning, if I'm in Q2 right here, and maybe the cast skip a chunk of the script, and I need to very quickly go straight to Q4. I'm going to go into Q4 right now, and my chase continues to run, because of course we've skipped over the release. We haven't told the console we wanted that chase to release. So what can I do about that? Well, first things first that you could do is, if you're finding this is potentially happening quite regularly, go into the settings of the next queue, go to macros, and just go and release it again. Okay, and so now I've got a couple of release commands, one after the other. Now, if I've gone into Q3 and I've released my chase, and I go into the next queue, which tries to release it again, well, nothing's going to happen. It's already released. So if you find that that's kind of tripping you up, you could go in and put a couple of release macros in, kind of make sure that you've got a little bit of flexibility there to help you out. Now, the other option is, if you're on stage right now and you go into a queue and you have that moment of panic of, where on earth is that? Why is that chase still running? And of course, you don't know what fader it's being controlled from. You don't know which one you need to bring up and take down. There is a really useful shortcut to be aware of that can manually turn off any playbacks that are running except the master. Okay, so a really useful shortcut that can turn off all playbacks except the master. Okay, and that is to press and hold your clear button and tap the fader function button. So if you press and hold clear and tap fader function, that turns off all playbacks except the master playback. Okay, and so then you're back to just whatever queue you're in on the master playback. Now, if you wish to, you can also set a fade time for that. So if I just go and show you my Z window again, the very last option in here is programmer time. And I can go and click on programmer time to enable that one. And if I press and hold clear and tap fader function, that will then release any active playbacks over the programmer time. So you can also set fade time to that if you wish to make it a little bit more subtle. Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much, Daniel. We had a comment from Facebook. He's finding this very useful. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Glad to hear you finding that one useful. Any questions that anyone has, do please keep them coming, and we can go in and answer those for you. So there we are. That is chases. So we've looked there at programming our chase. We've looked at the chase settings. We've also looked at updating a chase, and now we've spent a little bit of time looking about how we can trigger chases and release them from queues in a queue stack as well. Okay, as I said, any questions on chases, do let me know, and I can definitely come back to any if there are. But if we're happy with that, let's dive in. Let's kind of park the chases side of things for now and dive in and take a look at effects on the console. Okay, so that's it for chases. Let's look at effects. And for this, I'm actually going to go and close my external window, and I'm just going to work off of the internal touchscreen for now. You can work off of the external, but I'm just going to work off the internal for now. Just before I move on, just had a comment from John on Facebook. What is the best way to update a queue when a chase is running in it? Okay, so by that, I'm going to go and open my external monitor again. So I'm guessing, how do we go into our queue here? How do we go into this queue here when we have chases running? Okay, so what if I want to just update this base lighting state without the chase running over the top? I would probably recommend for that to actually do that clear release option. So by that I mean press and hold clear and tap your fader function button. You know then what is on stage is the base level of that queue, and you can then just include those values into your queue. You can really clearly see just the base lighting state on stage, make the edits. So I'm gonna, in my case here, let's say I wanted light 21 on in this case, and I'm going to go and update that queue. I'm going to do it as a queue only update, and update that queue, and I've now been able to update my base queue, and if I now go into that queue again, I can then have that one running with my chase over the top. Okay, so I hope that answers your question there, John, on that one. Okay. Great stuff. Great questions there, though. So yeah, keep them coming. So let's take a look at effects now. Okay. So for this, I'm going to go to my groups window on the console. So I'm going to tap G to go to my groups window. If you're on FLX S, you will have a little 4 tiles icon where you can use your groups. We've covered groups in a couple of other videos. So do check them out if you want more info. Groups, just really quick shortcuts to grab control of our lights. So I'm going to go in and double click on group 6. Okay, for the next half of the session, we're going to be using group 6 quite regularly. That's actually exactly the same as me going in and saying 1 through 10 at. Okay, it's just a shortcut, but using the groups. So using the groups, a single tap of the group will select those lights. A double tap of a group will turn those fixtures on to full. Really useful shortcut. And so let's go in, and I'm going to go and tap my effect button. If you're running on FLX S, scroll your tabs at the top of your touchscreen right to the end, and you will then be able to go to your effects. And in your effect window, if you haven't got any auto effects yet, go and tap automatically create effect palettes. Okay, and what that's going to do is that's going to generate for you 45 auto effects for your fixtures. It's going to create 45 auto effects for your lights. I've gone and reselected these fixtures, and I can see the effects that are available for these particular lights. So I can see all of these effects are blue, all of them are highlighted, except these last 5, okay, which are greyed out. Now these last 5 effects here are beam effects. So what we mean by that, they adjust the fixture's iris, or they might adjust the fixture's focus, for example. And in my case here, these are just some moving wash lights. Okay, so they don't have irises and focuses, for example. So those effects are greyed out. Okay, but if you had, for example, some moving profiles and things like that, fixtures with an iris, fixtures with a focus, those effects would be available to you. So what have we got in our effects window with our auto palettes? First things first, effect number 1 is always no effect. Tap that one, you're going to stop any effects running on the selected fixtures. Okay. Then effects 2 through to 10 are intensity effects. Effects 2 through to 10 are intensity effects. Okay, so even if you've just got some generic parkans patched in and nothing else on your console, you will still be able to access effects 2 through to 10. So if I've gone in and selected these fixtures using my groups, and I'm going to then go and apply a chaser effect, instantly I've got a chase running across my fixtures that took us 10 minutes to program earlier on. So something that I would probably encourage you, kind of as a good place to start, is if you think, I need an effect on stage, rather than going in and programming a chase, take a look at the effects first, because you might find that there's an auto effect in there that will do exactly what you want, or potentially give you a better result than you were expecting, but save you all of the time of going in and programming each step. So I definitely recommend diving in and taking a look to see whether there's any effects you can use rather than chases. So in this case here, I have applied my chaser effect, and it is very quickly and easily running across those fixtures. What other chaser effects have we got? Well, the first of which is chaser half. What we mean by that is half of those fixtures are on, half of them are off, and they're just going to chase round. Chaser quarter, you guessed it, and it works down like that. Got some really nice ones in there as well. So we've got some really nice smooth ripples. Also got ramp up and ramp down. So that terminology we've already covered today. And as well as that, we've got some really nice effects that can be used for more theatrical stuff. So I've got some LED kit, and I just want it to look like there's a lightning effect running across those fixtures. Well, go and select them, go and choose lightning, and you're going to get some really nice kind of flashes and pulses of lightning effects across your fixtures. Similarly, there is really nice kind of things like candle effects, just for some nice intensity flickers. You could imagine you've kind of got a birdie uplighting a performer's face. You can get some really nice flickers as if they're looking at a fire or something like that. So loads of really nice effects in there for you to use. Now, when we've got an auto effect running, I'm just going to go and choose Chaser Half again. What controls do we have? When we've got an effect running, what controls do we have? And we can use our encoder wheels, first things first, to have a look at some of the options we got available. And on the first encoder, we have our speed control. Fairly self-explanatory. Every effect that you have running will have a speed control. How quick or slow do you want that to run? So I can go and give that a little bit of a boost if I want to, or I can go and slow that one right the way down. Worth mentioning, if you go into negative speeds, you will actually reverse the direction of that effect. So if you go into a negative speed, you would just, it's a really easy way of flipping the direction of your effect. Next control you've got is the size of your effect. Now, when it comes to effect, size is always, the best way of describing it really, is always how obvious do you want the effect to be to your audience. So when it comes to intensity effects, if I jump in there and reduce the size, I bring the base level up and the top level down. Okay, and as I continue to reduce the size, the effect becomes invisible, essentially. But it's a really useful tool. It means you can actually make the effect a little bit more subtle across your fixtures if you wish to instead. I'm just going to go and put that one back to 100% size. Okay. Now, as well as speed and size, we can then use our offset control. So by offset, we mean we can say each fixture is going to be assigned an offset value, and by assigning an offset value, it means each fixture can start to follow on from one another. That's what we can see here. What we're seeing here is a auto offset. We've chosen the effect palette, and automatically the console is offsetting those fixtures, those lights across your currently selected fixtures. Running along the top of our effects window, though, we have some offset options. So very quickly, I've got forwards and backwards, so I can choose the order that that's going to run across. I've also got no offset. If you choose no offset, all of your fixtures will be doing the same thing. They're all going to be running at once. How does the console know what order your fixtures are in? Well, that is all down to the order of selection. Okay, it's the order that you selected your fixtures in. In my case here, I used group 6, and that is an auto group of all of my wash fixtures, and auto groups will naturally have those fixtures in fixture number order. But if I had quite a specific sequence that I wanted to run, I could have gone and selected those fixtures in that sequence and then gone and applied forwards, and it would have run forwards in that sequence. So we got forwards and we got backwards. And as well as that, on the end, we have random. Tap that, the console's going to go and create a random order for those fixtures. It's going to, what it's actually done in the background there, it's gone and given each one of those fixtures a random offset value. So they're going to be doing a random different thing from one another. Each time you tap random, the console is going to create a new random order for you. Okay, so it's kind of a subtly different random to chase. Okay, so when you do a random chase, the console is picking a completely different cue each time. When you do a random effect, the console has generated an order for you. Okay, but each time you tap random, as I said, the console will create a new random order. Okay, great stuff. We've had a comment from YouTube. Is it possible to tap on the effect's speed? Assume what you mean by that is it possible to use the speed control as a tap tempo? In which case, no, it isn't. Okay. Effects use something called more what we call waveform logic. So rather than being step based, it is waveform based. And that means there isn't really any kind of concept of beats per minute when it comes to effects. But we will see what tools that we have later when it comes to adjusting the speed of effects live. Okay, so I will go in a little bit more detail in some of the controls we've got available when it comes to the speeds of effects. So what else have we got in this option here? Okay. Well, we have spoken about our speed and our size. We've spoken about our offset options. And also in here, we have a offset encoder wheel. So if I go and spin that offset encoder wheel right now, instantly, all of my fixtures start to flash on and off together. It's given me exactly the same result as if I'd have gone in and chosen no offset. And this is something that sometimes catches people out. Because essentially what we've done right there is we've got all of these fixtures selected at once. And we've gone in, dialed the wheel, and given them all an offset value, in this case here, of 55. It's an arbitrary value, but we've given them all the same value. And therefore there is no offset across our lights. There is no chasing going to happen. And so if we want to use that encoder wheel, we can fan offset values across our fixture. Okay, we can fan offset values across our fixture. And if you joined us for the controlling and programming fixtures session, you will be familiar with this idea of fanning. And so first things first, let's dive in. Let's take a look at the fan options that we have available to us. So to do that, I'm going to press and hold Setup and tap the Effect key. Press and hold Setup and tap the Effect key on the console. And if you're on FLX S, press and hold Setup and tap the Effect tab at the top of the touchscreen. And that will take us into our effect settings. Okay. First things first, worth mentioning, there is a sensitivity option in here, so you can go and change the wheel sensitivity of your encoder wheels if you want them to be more sensitive or less sensitive. But then also in here we have the wheel mode. Okay, and at the moment the wheel mode is set to absolute, meaning if I have a bunch of lights selected and I were to go and set the speed, adjust the speed wheel, all of them would go to being at the speed of whatever that wheel displays. Okay. But what we've also got in there is a line of text there saying hold shift to choose the shifted mode. And I'm going to go and press and hold shift on my laptop. And if you were on a console, you could press and hold the shift key on your console. And you can see that that selected option jumps. And I've got my shift key held down right now. And using these 4 fan options, so fan first, fan middle, fan last, or fan V, I can choose one of those fan options that I want to be the behaviour of when I hold shift and dial my wheel. So I'm going to hold shift, choose fan first, and then release my shift key. And I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to hold shift and dial my offset wheel. And I'm going to keep my shift key held and start to dial offset. And you can see there that the console starts to fan those values. And it's starting to give each one of those fixtures their own offset value. And so you can start to get those fixtures chasing. If I continue to fan that further and further, you're going to get less and less lights on at the same time. Okay, so in my case here, I've gone in and I've continued to offset those fixtures by holding shift and offsetting them with my fan first behaviour. And I am then continuing to fan these fixtures in order. Now, when you've gone in and you've set an offset you like, you've set a speed that you like, maybe you've set a size that you've liked as well, you can store all of that information into an effect palette. Okay, so to do that, create what you like, tap the record key on your console, scroll on down, and you can then choose an empty effect to store to. And that's that one stored in. Okay. I'll just show you a couple of other of the fan options in there. So again, I'm going to press and hold setup and tap my effect button. And this time I'm going to hold shift and choose fan V. So I'm saying that when my shift key is held, fan V is the selected option, and I will click OK. Okay, fan V or fan symmetrical, some people like to call it. So I'm going to hold shift and dial offset now, and just to show you, this is the sort of behaviour you would start to get with fan V. I'm starting to fan in or out to the middle. Okay. Again, right now I could then go and set my speed back to be a negative speed, and then it's going to work out from the middle, for example. So loads of flexibility you've got available to you there using the different fan options when it comes to offset. Again, I'm actually going to go and tap record. I'm going to use a little bit of syntax because I'm on Flex, so I'm actually going to use the syntax record effect 47 enter to store that one in. Okay. And everything we've done there with our offsets and our speeds and our size can also be applied to the other types of effects in here. So let's dive in and take a look at some of them. So effects 11 through to 20, those are your movement effects, your position effects. So I can go and get those guys running in a circle across my rig, for example. They're going to be running that effect around the point that they currently are directed in. So what I mean by that is whatever their pan and tilt values are right now, they're going to be running that movement around that point. So if I go to my positions right now, these are just some pre-programmed palettes that have already been made for us in this particular show file. But if I want them to run in a circle downstage, I'm going to go and tap my downstage palette, and they are now running in a circle around the downstage position. Okay. Hopefully, depending on your internet connection, will depend on how smooth this looks. Okay, but to me, this is looking like a really smooth circle effect. So you can just, essentially, this is the base point of the effect. So you choose the base point using the pan and tilt controls, and then you can run your different effect shapes. So similar thing in there, I might go and choose a figure of 8 to start get them to run that kind of effect. I've got circle in there, I've got square, just different shapes that those fixtures can run across. There's a couple of really nice effects in there as well. So things like effects 19 and 20, you've got vertical and horizontal line. So I could go and get a vertical line just rippling across those fixtures, just affecting the tilt. So I can start to get a really nice tilt ripple in there, or similar thing, I can get horizontal line, and I can get all of those fixtures starting to chase one another, rippling one after the other. We've had a comment from Phil on YouTube. Cheers for the comment. Let me just have a very quick read of this one. If you record an intensity effect with a chase of 10 lights, yep. First into one stacked queue on the master playback. What is the best way to record another chase of 10 lights slow at a different speed into the same queue stack? Let's explore that a little bit in a bit when we get into programming queues. So what Phil was saying there is I want to have a queue that has my fixtures at one speed, and then the next queue that has my fixtures at a different speed, and how are those going to interact? Let's dive in and take a look at that later when we start to do a little bit of programming with our effects. But really good question. So what other effects have we got in there? So we got those effects in there. As I said, I can then go and choose a random on that. When it comes to position effects, size is actually how large an area do you want those fixtures to move across. So if I go and increase the size, that is actually physically how large an area do I want those fixtures to move across. And I can just continue to increase that. Okay. Great stuff. A shortcut for no effect, if you're on the full-size Flex console, you can press and hold Effect and tap Home. If you press and hold effect and tap home, that is also a shortcut for clicking no effect. Okay, just thought I'd mention that one. Okay, next set of effects that we can look at as well is effects 21 through to 40 are then all colour effects. So you've got 20 colour effects, just auto effects at your disposal. So yes, of course, you've got your classic things like rainbows, has to be done, but actually there's some much more interesting effects in there as well. So there's some really nice sparkle effects, so kind of a block colour but with pulses of white flashing over the top. There's some really nice fade effects, so really quick option for a blue and orange ripple across your fixtures. Just loads of really nice effects in there to get you started that you can then start to adjust the speed, the size and the offset of. Also in there, again, really nice effects in there that can be used for things like theatrical use. So I could go and choose an emergency blue, and it can look like there's a police car parked outside, for example, with some pulses of blue flashing. Similarly to that, I've got things like a fire effect. If you choose fire, you're going to get some really nice kind of warm colours. So I could use my fire effect in conjunction with my candle effect. So I can get an intensity ripple with fiery colours. Okay. Loads of other different colour effects like that. Now, as well as taking a look at all of these effects here, we can overlay effects as well. So let's say that I wanted these fixtures to run in a circle, and I want them to have a blue sparkle over the top as well. So I've got a blue sparkle running there, and I have a circle effect. Okay. And you might be thinking, okay, well that's lovely. I've started to overlay my effects, start to get all those different attributes all laying on top of each other. But actually, I just want to slow down the position effect a little bit. Just want to slow down the position effect a little bit. On my encoder wheels right now, I can see speed, size, and offset. Okay. And that would be the global speed, size and offset of whatever is running right now. So if I went and adjusted speed right now, I would be adjusting the speed of the colour effect and the position effect. If I tap effect again, so actually go and click your effect button again, it pages your encoder wheel. And right now I'm looking at E11 speed, E11 size, E11 offset. And so a quick look up here, yep, that is my circle. E11 is my circle. So if I want to go and just slow down my circle effect a little bit, but keep my colour effect running at the same rate. I'm going to tap effect again, and that takes me to E28. Yep, that's my sparkle blue. So I could go in and again manipulate those different values as well. Tap effect again and you loop back to the beginning, back to the global controls. A question we often get asked is, what about if you've overlaid loads of effects and you want to get rid of one of those effects? You've got really nice overlaid, but I just want to get rid of the movement effect. Again, page through till you get to that effect. So I'm seeing E11 right now, and then just dial the size to 0. Simple as that. Dial the size to 0, it is then not active on stage. Okay, and it's then just going to be showing you any of the other effects that are currently running. I'm actually going to go and tap backspace to undo that last command. And here we are, we're back to my position effect and my colour effect. And when I'm happy, I'm going to store that effect in. So I can go and tap record and tap that effect. Now there's something that's really important to be aware of. Now right now I have stored that palette, and I've got it annotated there with a little E. Got it annotated with a little E on the palette. Okay, which means the effect information is stored in there, which is great, of course, that's exactly what we want. But also right now, these fixtures are positioned in my downstage position. So if I want to be able to recall exactly this effect, I would have to apply the effect, I'd have to apply the position, I'd have to get them at the same intensity they were at, and blah blah blah. I'd have to kind of use that as just one of the building blocks to create this lighting state. So if instead I want to store everything about this lighting state right now into my effect palette, I can go and do a shift record. And if you do shift record, that's going to write record all into your command line. Do a shift record, and I'm then going to go and tap in on an empty effect palette. And when I do that, I then get ICBPE, intensity, color, beam, position, and effect. All of that is stored into that palette for me. Okay, which means I could actually go and home those fixtures. Homing the fixture means sets it back to full intensity, back to white, back to beam shape being cleared, and back to its home position. So it's kind of a back to square one, if you like. So I could go straight from those fixtures being homed. I've just gone in and tapped my home button on the console, and I could then go straight back to my recorded effect. Notice if I went from home to this effect, notice I actually get very different results. So that's a really useful tip to be aware of. If you want everything about your current lighting state to be stored in a palette, do it as a shift record, and that's going to then allow you to recall everything. Okay. Comment from Phil on YouTube. In the case of 10 fixtures at a fast chase speed and then a different set of fixtures at a slow speed running in one queue on the master playback. I assume from what you mean by that, obviously if you've got two chases and you want them at different speeds, they can't both be set to use global BPM. Okay. Of course, if you want to use that chase in one scene, that chase in another scene, that chase in another scene, they can all be set to use global BPM, and you can just adjust the speed of that live depending on what one you need. But if you want two chases to run simultaneously at different speeds, they wouldn't be able. Only one of them would be able to use global BPM. The other one would have to have a static BPM speed set. I hope that answers your question on that one, Phil. Apologies if it doesn't. Let me know, and I can elaborate. Great stuff. So that is layering effects. That's programming our effect palettes as well. Last thing we're going to look at, well, a couple of things we're going to look at before we dive in and start to program some effects into queues. Is last thing you might be wondering, oh, there's this last encoder here, rotation. Rotation is only available if you are working with your position effects, movement effects. So if I go and say that I want, for example, a horizontal line, which will just by default be working on the pan control of those fixtures, I'm actually going to go and say no offset, just so it's a little bit clearer to see. If I start to go and add a little bit of rotation on that, notice how it also starts to add in a little bit of tilt. Okay, so rather than it just being a left to right, we are starting to add in tilt to that as well. You are rotating. If you imagine it kind of in 3D space, you are rotating that effect around. Okay, similar one. If I've got a vertical line running, and I can go and apply a bit of rotation on that one, rather than them going all up and down on their tilt axis, add in a little bit of rotation, and I'm also going to start to rotate that effect as well. Okay, so I hope that's clear. It's easy to have a play with when you're kind of in front of your lights yourself, but it just allows you to add in a little bit of rotate. You can rotate the axis that that effect is running across. Only available with position effects. As well as that, on the full-size Flex console, you have a waveforms area. So if you're on the full-size Flex, you have a waveforms area. Now what this will do is this will show you every parameter of your currently selected fixture. It's going to show you every parameter of your currently selected fixtures, so I can see all of the parameters of my clay packy fixtures in this case. Okay, and it allows me to go in per parameter and set a different function, and each function can have its own speed, size, and offset value. So it allows you to go really in depth. So what I mean by that is I could go and choose a function for tilt, and I've got all of these various functions here that I can use for tilt. The most basic of which really is a sine wave, so just doing a sine wave function over the tilt parameter. So I'm going to go and set a sine wave for tilt, and I'm actually going to go and set a sine wave tilt for intensity. And I then might want my tilt speed to be 20, and I'm going to give that a size of 20 as well. But then my intensity speed, I might want that one to be at 30, a little bit quicker, and have a size of 100, for example. And so I can start to overlay these effects here and start to get really in depth with my fixtures. And you can see there that I've now got intensity and tilt effect all running at once on those fixtures across my lights. Okay, so it's a really useful area. You can go in and get really in depth there with your different parameters and going in and set them all at different levels. And when you're happy with all of that and you've gone in and created all of those yourself manually, again, tap record, scroll down, and you can then go and choose to store that as your own empty effect palette. Okay, and that's then stored in. So yeah, Waveforms then a really powerful tool when it comes to the full-size Flex console. And that is all of the effects tools that we have available to us. So let's go in and start to program a few of those into cues. Okay, so I'm going to go and apply a circle effect on those. I'm actually going to go and put them in a colour just to make it a little bit more interesting. Let's put them in a blue. And I'm then going to go and record that onto a playback fader. So I'm going to go and tap record right now, and I'm going to store it onto my playback fader. I'm going to double tap clear, and then let's play that one back. I'm going to go back to looking at my external monitor for this bit, just give us a little bit more information. And I'm going to go and push my playback fader up, and what we're going to see is that effect is going to fade in. The colour, the position, the effect, they all fade in to get to that result. That's the default. That's the default fade times on the console doing that. If I want to go and start to adjust some of those fade times, I can press and hold View and tap that Effects button. And that will open that effect in the cue list window. So I'm looking at my effect I've programmed on Playback 7, and I'm actually going to go in and get rid of my colour fade. When you're adjusting fade times, you can also use the encoder wheels to do that. And I'm going to go and set that back to no fade at all. And so this time when I raise my effect, my fader, instantly the fixtures are going to go straight to the colour and straight to the position effect. Okay. And so we've got that effect running, and it's running at the programmed speed. But what about if we want to start to have a little bit more control on the speed and the size of that effect? Okay, something that you might want to quite often do is fade the fader in, and as well as the intensity building, you might want the effect to build up as well. And if we want to do that, we can go into the playback settings. So again, press and hold the setup key and tap that playbacks button. Or I'm going to go to the faders window and actually click on that on-screen fader. And in here, in the general area of the playback settings, I have some fader controls options. So I can say, okay, well, yes, as well as the fader controlling intensity, I can also have it controlling some of my attributes. And in this case here, I'm going to go and click on effect and give it a red stripe, meaning it is enabled. Okay, and I'm going to go and then click OK. And what that now means is as I build my fader up, my colour and my position snap, because remember, that's what we set in our fade times window, in our keyless window. But as I raise that fader, I'm starting to build the size and the speed of that effect. And as I continue to raise that, it's just going to start to build and start to build until that fader is right the way up at full. And you're then going to be back to your programmed speed and your programmed size. And again, as I lower that, I can just lower the speed, I can reduce the speed and reduce the size using my fader. Okay. Comment from YouTube. Thanks very much for the feedback. Yep, so some interesting bits on recording new effects, and also the shift record would help as well. No problem, Phil. Thanks for the feedback on that one. Now you'll notice in this case here, that is controlling the speed and the size. But what about if you just want to be able to control the speed of your effect? You want to boost it up or slow it down live. Well, for that, we can use our speed override control. And we covered the speed override control in our programming cues session. Speed override, I'm going to go and open my internal touchscreen. Speed override can be found if you tap the Z button on your console. Speed override can be found on the second encoder wheel. And the speed override control will adjust the speed of any effects in the currently viewed cue stack. So speed override will always be adjusting whatever playback you are currently viewing in the cue list window. And remember, to view a different cue list, press and hold view, and you can just tap on the playback button of the one you want to look at. So because playback 7 is in my cue list window right now, it means if I go and raise it, I can then go and slow that down using my speed override control, and I'm slowing down the speed of that effect. If I dial that speed override wheel fully anti-clockwise, I will stop. I will pause that effect from running. Okay, and again, if I dial it the other way, I can then start to speed that up, and I can get that running as quick as possible. Okay, if you tap the middle button of that encoder, it resets the speed override back to the programmed speed. Okay, tap the middle button, it will reset the speed of that effect back to the programmed speed. Now, as well as having an encoder wheel to control the speed override, exactly like we did with our our global tap tempo for our chases, we can also set speed override to be controlled by a fader as well. So to do that, go to your playbacks, press and hold setup, and tap an empty playback button. And in my case here, I'm going to go to my faders window and click in on an empty playback fader. And in the window, I've got the option in here to go and configure that fader to be a speed override control. Okay, so I'm going to go and choose speed override and click OK. And now that fader's kind of resting position, that kind of the fader's home position, if you like, is actually at 50%, because it's going to be no override at 50% at the midpoint. But again, I can now use a fader to slow down that effect or speed it up, all from the use of a fader. So it's a really powerful tool to be aware of. Okay, so equally right now, I could go in and I could go and say group 6 at. I'm going to go to my effects on my external monitor. I'm going to go and choose a chaser effect, and I'm going to record that to another playback. And I now have my chaser running here, and if I go and view that playback, so this I'm going to press and hold view and tap playback number 9 in that case there, I can then use speed override to go and speed that up or slow it down. Equally, I'm going to then go and raise my effect here. I'm going to go back to viewing that one, and then I can go and give that one a bit of a speed up or a bit of a slow down. So with your one speed override, your one effects rate master, you can just jump between different effects. You can have several effects running, press and hold view, tap it, speed it up, press and hold view, tap another one, slow it down, and you can just jump between all of these different effects and adjust all of their different speeds live. Okay, so speed override is a really useful tool to be aware of when it comes to your running effects live. Okay, the last thing that I want to do before we wrap up is just talk about a subject that catches a lot of people out as well. First thing, I'm going to tap delete and then tap my speed override controller. Okay, just to get rid of that one. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to program an effect into a cue stack. So I'm going to go and say, well, actually, I'm going to be lazy, and I'm going to use that effect as the first cue. So there we are, that's my first cue. I'm going to tap record and store that onto a playback fader. I'm then going to have a blackout. So select those, and let's have those at dot. And I'm going to record that as my next cue. Create cue 2. Okay. And they're then going to come on again, but this time they are not going to have an effect, and they're just going to be in a fanned position in a red, for example. And I'm going to record that onto my effects button, onto that playback button again. Okay, I'm now going to go and view that playback. So I've now got 3 cues on my playback there, and let's run them through. So I'm in my first cue there, that has my effect running. I'm then going to tap my playback button to go into the next cue, and that's going to fade on out like that. And here comes the problem, because you'll notice that right now those fixtures are still moving. Okay, they're still moving, and that's kind of what we wanted, because otherwise what we would have ended up with is we'd have seen those fixtures starting to stop when we went into the blackout. Whereas instead what we got was we got those fixtures on, but then we just simply saw the intensity lower and the effects still run. But on the flip side of that, we now have movers moving around in our rig without us telling them to, essentially, moving them around in our rig in dark. And we also end up that when we go into our next cue, we see this weird movement thing happening, because they have because as far as the console's concerned, we wanted those fixtures in their movement effect, and we've then gone ahead and said stop moving. So we actually see that process of the effect stopping. And so what you need to do is, if you go into your blackout cue there, and I go in to my effects, and I go and say no effect, that's going to stop them moving. But there's something really important we need to be aware of. If I go and tap update right now, by default, there is a function called Smart Tag enabled, and we went in detail in what Smart Tag does in the tracking session. Okay, so check that one out if you want more info. But basically, Smart Tag will ignore colour, beam, position and effect information if a fixture is at 0%. So these fixtures at 0% right now, I've gone and said no effect, and then I'm about to update the cue. But if Smart Tag is enabled, the console's going to go, oh, well, these fixtures are at 0, I'm not using them. So I'm not going to care about the fact that you've told them you've given them a no effect instruction. So what you need to do in this case here is, if you find that you've got a blackout, cue with fixtures moving around, select the fixtures, choose no effect, tap update, and if you don't have an external monitor connected, press and hold update to open the update options in the internal touchscreen, and go and tap Smart Tag so that it has a blue stripe, meaning disabled. And I can now go in, and I'm going to go and confirm that, update my cue, and now I'm in my blackout and those fixtures will have stopped moving. Okay, so I can now go back to the first cue, their effect fades in, go to my next cue, they fade out and the effect stops. My fixtures actually can now move on dark. You see I've got my grey background there, and you'll also see that they actually did a little bit of moving in dark. And I can then go into Q3, and I simply get intensity raised over the top. So that's a really useful tip to be aware of. Okay, it makes your programming a little bit more, it takes your program to that next stage, makes it a bit more refined. Just before we wrap up, as well, if when you go from Q1 to Q2 in this case, you don't want to see that effect moving, have Q2 as your blackout and then actually have another effect in there, another cue in there that then stops the effect. Okay, so you could have, in my case here, I could actually have a Q2.5, my Q2 would simply lower the intensity, my Q2.5 would then be the cue that had that no effect instruction. And if you wanted to actually go that one step further and make it a little bit more clever, you could then have that no effect instruction automatically following on by going into your settings and choosing auto. You could have that automatically following on from the previous. So you tap your go button, lights fade out, automatically then stop the effect, and then they will have moved on dark, ready for when they're next used. And there we go. That is everything that I wanted to cover in this session, in our chases and effects session. I hope you found that useful. If there are any last minute questions, do please pop them in last minute. Thank you for the guys that have gone in and popped some questions in there. I hope you found that useful. If you're watching this on kind of on YouTube after the session has been live streamed, and you think, oh, I've got a question, we'll put it in the comments anyway. Okay, and one of the team will be able to get back to you on that one. Or alternatively, always feel free to email us support@088.com, and we can also get back to you that way. As I said, check out some of our other videos as well that go into all of the other topics that I've kind of been mentioning throughout this session. And if you are watching live, we've got a slightly different session. We've got a session on Ethernet networking this afternoon with my colleague John, and he's going to be going in depth in terms of Ethernet networking and things like ArtNet, streaming ACN. So also do check that one out this afternoon, and if you're watching this back on YouTube or Facebook, that video you'll be able to find that on our channel as well. I haven't had any last minute comments come in. Thanks very much for joining me, everyone. I've just had a wait message to me. I think I've got a question coming in, so I will just wait a moment to see if we've got any more questions. I hope you found that useful, as I've said, and do check out any of our other videos. Just waiting for if there's another comment coming my way. Comment from John on Facebook. Can I record the blackout without the effect? Yes, yeah. So what John's saying there is, do I have to go back and update a cue? No, I could have recorded that as a new cue. Okay, so if I wanted to do that, if I was in, let me just make a really quick example of that. Actually, I can do it on in this example here. If I want to go, okay, well, I want select those lights. I want them to stop running their effect. So I'm going to say no effect, and I'm then going to go and say at dot to turn them off. Okay, so I've gone in and said select those fixtures, no effect, turn them off. I then again can tap record and make sure that smart tag is off in my record options. Again, to open the record options in the internal touchscreen, press and hold record. So yeah, John's exactly right. You don't have to do that process of going back and updating your cue. If you want to, turn your fixtures off, stop their effect running, tap record, turn smart tag off, and record that in. And I'm going to choose Create 2, like that one. Double tap clear, and I've then got my effect there, my cue there, that will then fade those guys off. Okay. So I hope that answers your question, John, on that one. Okay, so yeah, you can indeed record it with no effect in blackout by making sure smart tag is off at the point of recording that blackout. Great stuff. Well, there's no other questions coming my way, so thanks very much everyone for joining me. It's been great to have you with us. I hope you found that useful, and if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. Thanks very much everyone. Take care.